Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Today I'm showing 3 different cards using one stamp set, and we are taking a deeper dive into the Looks Like Rain stamp set. But even if you don't have it, trust me, I'm showing tons of amazing tips in this video that you can apply to using supplies you have at home. So let's get into it. Alright, so like I said, today we're using the Looks Like Rain stamp set. I love this one because it's got a great variety of images in it, from kind of some images that are great for coloring, and then some that stamp solid that you can use to fill those images in. So I'm starting off with the umbrella image, and I'm going to add it down onto an acrylic block. And whenever I add an image down like this, wherever there isn't a design, that area doesn't get stuck down as well, and sometimes there can be air bubbles. So I recommend just kind of pressing out the air bubbles, lifting up the image a little bit, and that's going to help you get a smoother image altogether. I'm doing some embossing later in the card, so I added down a little bit of anti-static powder tool to make sure that it won't stick where I don't want it to. Then we're going in and doing our stamping. For this I'm using a pigment ink that takes a little bit longer to dry. This is VersaFine Nocturne Clair, and I'm just going to take this image and stamp it throughout the background. Now I started with one right in the center there. I find that it's helpful to start in the center of the background and work my way out so I get an even design. And I'm just going to kind of flip and rotate this umbrella to fit it together like a puzzle and create a nice almost pattern paper background. I love to create my own backgrounds like this instead of buying a pattern paper because I like the handmade aspect of it and that I'm able to create my own design. Making a background like this is one of my favorite ways to use a stamp set, especially if I'm in a creative block or something like that, because it's so simple to do and you could do it with so many different designs of stamps. Once I've stamped down that whole background and filled my card, I'm going to then go over with a layer of clear embossing powder. Now you guys know I just love the finished look of clear embossing powder, and since my ink takes a little bit longer to dry, I'm able to still throw it over once I'm done stamping. Then I'm going to heat set this with my Wagner heat tool until it turns nice and clear and shiny, and it gives a darker black bold look. Then I'm going to go in and do some stamping. Now for this I'm using this solid image that's going to color in the umbrella. I love that this was included in the stamp set because it makes coloring these in super easily. So I went in with a lighter color. You saw me use a little bit of guppy there, and then I rolled on a darker color. There I used a little bit of bee sting. And then you can stamp it down and get a really beautiful, almost watercolored look. I'm going to do the same thing with other colors. Here I used a little bit of Psych and No Diving, and again with the darker color, I just roll it on using the edge of my ink pad. I sprayed it with water a little bit, and then I stamped that down. I love how simple it is to color these in with this stamp and these ink pads, and by doing that little technique of rolling the ink pad on the edge, it gives a beautiful shaded look and it doesn't take any time at all. And again, that little bit of water helps to kind of blend those two colors together. You could always kind of dab on a blending tool if you want to soften the edge a little bit in between the colors, but I thought the water was a cool look and added a kind of a bit of an organic look to it. So I just rotated through those color combinations, kind of switching off to give the umbrellas a little bit of variety. The purple tones that I used were a little bit of Sidewalk Chalk and Triple Berry, and then I introduced the last color combination here, which was Shooting Star and Roar. And I love these umbrellas and how beautiful, bright, and bold they turned out. There also is a little image that colors in the handle and the stick of the umbrella, so I just used a little bit of Woof, which is my gray color, and I stamped those down. It was super easy to just line them up, ink them up, and do it with all of the umbrellas. Of course, you could do little details like this using colored pencils or markers as well. Then to cut down this background, I wanted to size it down for my card, and I'm using this little mini guillotine trimmer from Holtz and Tonic. I love this trimmer to just keep on my desk and be able to cut down backgrounds really quickly and easily, and it's nice and portable. Next, I'm going to go in and do a little bit of blending for this background to make it a little bit less stark white and add some more color. For this, I'm using a little bit of light breakup blue color, and I'm going to go in using a blending brush. Now, I use the same kind of color family blending brush for several different shades of blue, so I just wipe it off on the side to make sure that it's going to be this light color, and then I'll go in starting from the edge and add a little bit of blue. I did this all around the edge, and it's a nice light color, so it just added a little bit of color and contrast, and it draws your eye to the center since it keeps the center nice and bright white. I love doing this technique to darken the edges and draw your eye to the focal point in the center. Then I cut down a card panel that was a little bit larger, just a tiny bit, to add a little bit of a black border around the edge. I like that adds a little bit of contrast as well, and then I added it down onto my A2 size card base. Moving on to the sentiment, I'm going to do some heat embossing to add a little bit more contrast as well. I stamped down in Versamark ink the sentiment that says, "You make me happy when skies are gray." I love the encouraging sentiments in this set. And then I'll throw over a layer of white embossing powder. Tap off the excess, and then I'm going to heat emboss it. I love that this contrast gives a nice bright white sentiment on the black cardstock. Here's a closer look at the finished card. I love how easy it was to color in this background and how bright those umbrellas are. But like I said, you can do this sort of pattern paper technique by repeating the image with many stamp sets. Moving on to the next two cards, we're going to do them kind of both simultaneously. I'm going to start off with this image of the girl holding the umbrella and stamp it down onto my card base. Now I'm kind of centering this one because I'm not cutting it out, so I want it to be centered on my card, and I'm stamping it down using some of that same black ink. Then I'm going to go in again with clear heat embossing powder and throw it over the top. Now this time I'm doing the clear heat embossing powder for more than just looks. This is because we're doing a little bit of watercoloring in a little bit, and I find that the little bit of raised surface helps to keep the ink inside of the lines and not bleed out. So moving on to the next card, I'm going to stamp down this little boy who's going to be splashing in the puddles. And I'm going to kind of line up the puddle exactly where I want it for spacing, pull that out, and then stamp down the boy. We're going to be doing a little bit of masking, and so if you ever do masking, you want whatever image you want to be the front focal point to be stamped down first. So I stamped down the boy first, I clear heat embossed him again because we're doing some watercoloring in a little bit, and then I'm going to stamp down the puddle, and the puddle is going to kind of go over top of him. So we need to mask him off a little bit, so I'm going to introduce you to my lazy masking technique. Here I take a little bit of removable tape, this is mint tape, and I'm going to just kind of rip a thin little piece of it that's going to cover the boot area. So ripping that thin little piece off, that's going to exactly perfectly fit, and then place it down over top of the boot. And I'm only placing it down where the line is going to kind of intersect that boot. I don't need to do perfect masking anywhere else. So just placing some of that tape down, I'm telling you, this works great. I do it with flowers all the time too, when I want to mask off leaves. And then I'm going to stamp down the puddle, lining it up exactly where that tape is, and then stamping it right down. And then when I lift that tape off, I'm going here with little tweezers to lift that off, you can see that it perfectly masked off that image, and it was a lot easier than having to go in and cut those boots out to mask them off. Then I'm going to stamp down some little water droplets that are going to add to him splashing in the puddles, and again I'll heat emboss those. Now moving into some watercoloring with my ink pads, I'm going to give you guys some tips as well. I like to kind of create a palette on my work surface, on my craft sheet, using the ink pads by just smooshing them down onto the surface to get some of the ink out. So just flip the ink pads over and give them a little bit of pressure, and you'll have a nice little spot of ink that you can then lift from and do your watercoloring with. It's a really easy way to get a nice palette of colors on your surface. Alright, now we're going to move into the watercoloring, and I'm going to share some of my favorite tips that I've learned to make watercoloring with ink pads super easy. My first tip here is to add a light layer of water over top of the image you're about to color before you color that section in. So here you can see I'm going to do the boy's jacket, and I'm going to add a thin layer of water down first. This kind of conditions the cardstock before you go right in with your ink, and it makes it so that the ink has a little bit more playtime on the surface before it sinks right in. Since you've already added a little bit of liquid down, it's then ready to take that color, and it'll blend a lot more smoothly on the surface. You can see there it was a lot easier to get a nice solid layer of color without any splotches. Then once I'm done adding the first layer of color down, I'll go in with a little bit less water and a darker color, and I'll blend that down onto the surface to add a little bit of shadows and depth and dimension. Here I went in with a little bit of a darker orange. Next I'm moving on to his skin, and again I'm going into a separate area, so I'm going to add a little bit of a layer of water first. Then to color in a skin tone, my line doesn't really have a lot of neutral options, so I'm going to take a little bit of Over the Moon with a little bit of Gur, which is a brown and yellow, and mix those together. The yellow is going to give you the warmth that you need, and then you can add as much or as little Gur as you want to get either a lighter or darker skin tone. And I love that there's so many different options with that just by mixing those colors together. Then I'm going to move on to different areas. Here I'm doing the pants, so again starting off with a lighter wash of color, and then moving on to add a little bit more shading and depth and dimension. Now one thing I also wanted to mention as I do this is that I'm using just a regular brush here. This is one of Ranger's artist brushes. It's one of the small ones in the pack. Really any paintbrush will do, but I recommend using a paintbrush instead of a water brush. Water brushes are great for travel, but sometimes I find that I don't get enough control with them. I always found that either they put out too much water or too little of water, and I like having that control myself. So by having my own brush, I can control how much water I add. On the first layer, I add a little bit more water to get kind of a more solid wash of color. And then for the second layer, when I'm trying to darken the color, I go in with less water and I do a little bit of depth and dimension and shading on it. So bottom line, just try out different kinds of brushes, see which one works best for you. Again, I like this Ranger Artist brush, it's pretty cheap as well, but just having that control and being able to control exactly what you're doing is really super helpful, and I found my results drastically improved. To finish off the card with the boy jumping in puddles, I'm using this tiny circle stencil, and I'm gonna add a little bit of shading and texture to it. So I'm going in using the stencil, laying it over top of the image, and then I'll use a little bit of Guppy, which is the color that I used to watercolor his coat. I'm just taking this kind of detail blending brush from Altenew. I love these little blending brushes to go into really small little details and be able to color and blend things in. So I went in with this blending brush and just went on top of that coat, staying inside of the lines by using the edge of the blending brush, and because it's so small, it was really easy to stay inside the lines. And I was able to just quickly add a little bit of color to this. If you want something that's even smaller, the little Ranger detail blending tools are also super great to get into those little tiny areas. And that just added a little bit of those circles and texture to his coat. Then I used the same blending brush. I'm just kind of wiping it off to the side to get that orange out and to make sure it's a nice solid blue color. And then I'll go into the puddle and do the exact same thing. Just going in with kind of a light hand, using the side of the brush if I need to go in there and add this circle texture to the puddle as well. I love the dimension that this little bit of the stencil and the blending brushes add. I think it really steps this whole card up a notch, and I love that we were able to color inside those lines with those little tiny detail blending brushes. It's just so adorable. Alright, for this card base, I'm using a Sweet Mango cardstock from Gina Designs, and I'm going to score that to make an A2 size card. Now I like to do colored card bases every once in a while, and I love this orange color to match the coat. Now I'm going to go in with my Brutus Monroe Stick and Stamp mat. You guys, this mat is back in stock. Lots of you have been waiting for it, and I love using it for stenciling recently. So I'm going to stick down the piece of cardstock down to the center, and then I'll stick down my stencil too, and I love that it holds the stencil in place with the adhesive on the edges. Then I'm able to just go in here with a little bit of Guppy ink and my ink blending tool and just go along the edge to create a nice border of that same texture using the tiny circle stencil. Again, this stencil is so versatile. If I could recommend anything, I'd recommend this one. And it just adds the same texture that we added to the little boy's jacket onto the edges of the card to tie everything together. Then to remove this from the mat, I just peel the mat back so that it doesn't bend your cardstock and it lifts off easily. Then I'll add the stamped panel right down onto my card base there, adhere it down, and then I can stamp my sentiment. Here I'm just stamping it in the same black ink to get a nice crisp stamped image. And again, this one is super encouraging. It says, when life gives you a rainy day, play in the puddles. And again, to match the image, and because we know I love the look of it, I'm going to throw over a layer of clear embossing powder and heat set that until it's nice and bold and shiny. Alright, then once that's done, I'm going to go in and fussy cut this out. I like to use my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors for this because they spring back out at you so your hands won't get tired. And I just leave a little bit of a white border around the sentiment. I like to cut around sentiments like this just because it makes a little bit more room on my card and it doesn't cover as much of the image, but you could just cut it into a rectangle too. I added that down and I love how this card turned out. I love the scene that we were able to build with the masking technique and that we were able to go in there with that stencil and add texture to his coat and the puddle. It really brings it to life. Next, I'm going to show you a really fun card design you can do with a lot of images with this last card. So I'm going to go in here. You can do this vertically or horizontally on the card, but just kind of right in the center of the design. I'm going to go in with my Fiskars trimmer. You could use an X-Acto knife and a ruler as well. And I'm just going to use that little rotary blade to go right up to the image and stop before it cuts into the image. So stop right there and then move on to the other side and do the exact same thing. Cut a line, a straight line, going up until the image there. You'll see when I pull it out of the trimmer there, it's going to be 2 slits on either side. Here I did it on a diagonal, but you could do a straight line too. And then I'm going to go in with my Spring Assist scissors again, and I'm going to cut everything above that line. So just go right around the image. Again, I like these Spring Assist scissors because they spring back out at you, and they've got a nice fine tip, so they're really easily able to get into all these details. So I'm just leaving a little bit of a border and I'm going to go right around the image. It's super simple until I meet at the other side there. Then it's going to connect and you're going to have a straight line with the top part of that image cut out. I'm going to use the Looks Like Rain stencil. I think this coordinates perfectly with this stamp set. And I'm going to again bring it to the Brutus Monroe Stick and Stamp mat, put my card base down, which happens to be, I think, Sea Glass from Gina, and then I'm going to stick down my stencil right over top of it as well. I love with this stick mat that nothing moves, but I'm still able to move around the mat if I need to work on my project. Then I'm using a little bit of Lunar paste in the color Clear Skies, and I'm going to take a little bit of paste out on a palette knife and put it on my glass mat here. This is going to be kind of a palette that I work from because I like just enough paste, and I find that dipping your tool into that is perfect. And I'll go in with a sponge blending tool here and just go right into that paste and bring it onto my surface. I'm working in a blending motion just like I would with ink pads, but this Lunar paste is going to give you some nice blue color and also packed with tons of mica and shine to it as well. Now before I move on to kind of lifting off the project, I like to make sure my tools are super clean. So I'm going to go in with some water. You could take this to the sink too and remove off that sponge applicator and clean it really thoroughly until it's back to white. You don't want any Lunar paste in there or it's going to dry crusty. Same thing with the mat and your stencil. I'm going to just go in on the stick and stamp mat, spray it with water, and clean it off with a lint-free cloth. And once the water evaporates off the surface, it'll be super sticky again, and all you need to do is place back the acetate sheet and return it to storage, and you're ready to use it for the next time. By the time you're done cleaning, which is super fast, in about a minute, this stuff is already dry, and the Lunar paste is super shiny, and none of it comes off in your hand once it's dry. I love how it looks. Alright, I'm finishing this card off by stamping down a sentiment that says, "I'm here for you, rain or shine," and I'm just going to stamp that right down underneath our focal point image. Once that's stamped down, I'm going to again clear heat emboss it because you know me, we gotta include that step to finish things off here. Heat set that until it's clear and shiny, and then we can add this down onto our card. I love that doing that partial cut where half of it is cut off. It creates a lot of contrast and depth and dimension to your card making design rather than just leaving it on white cardstock. Alright guys, I hope you really enjoyed that video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up and leave me a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite. Also, links down below is a full supplies list to everything that I used in today's video, and those links help support me, so I really appreciate you guys using them. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and crafting, and I'll see you very soon for another card making video. Have a great day. Bye!